With that, we bring in Stephen Miller, President-elect Trump's incoming Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Homeland Security Advisor. It is a very important role. Stephen, welcome. It's great to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you. What a beautiful and hopeful and exciting moment we find ourselves in today.
So let's look at that, and let's look at this transition period, because I think there is a lot in what President Biden said last night about this warning to the country. And I want to get your reaction to this. Let's play a slightly different cut of what he said when he made that interesting turn in this speech and said, I have something I'm very concerned about that I want to warn America about. Watch this, Stephen.
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. This is a dangerous concentration, and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. An oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy.
What are your thoughts on that and the comparison to Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex, which, if anything, has gotten larger? He didn't seem to have a concern about that, Stephen.
Yeah, hard to put Biden and Eisenhower in the same sentence. Biden is not Eisenhower and doesn't even deserve to be mentioned in his company. It's clear, listening to Biden, and it doesn't bring me any pleasure to say this, that Biden is discovering what he's saying as he's saying it. In his last speech, it's evident, just listening to the way he's delivering it, that he's discovering the words as they are scrolling through the monitor on screen. He has no clue what he's even saying. It's just one more example of the radical staff that have been running this country, the crazy Marxists, on their way out the door, scrolling something in for Biden to say. Let's be very clear about Biden and the tech community, the Democrat Party and the tech community. They directed large corporations to censor American speech, to deplatform President Trump, to restrict the ability of Americans to speak their minds freely on issues of national import, most particularly, as we remember, on the coronavirus.
Yes.
And so this administration, the Biden administration, is the administration of oligarchy. They are the ones who directed and empowered large technology corporations to control American speech and to violate their First Amendment rights. Donald Trump is liberating this country from that odious censorship regime. And one of the first things you're going to see Donald Trump do after he becomes president is end federal censorship and open up online to free debate and free expression as our founders would have wanted.
You know, it's ironic when you think about Zuckerberg and the amount of money that he poured into Biden's campaign, and now suddenly he's struck with fear at the relationship that Zuckerberg and Bezos and Musk have with the incoming president. You know, what do you say about these fears that these, titans of industry, obviously, some of the most brilliant people that we have in the country, have the ear of the president? And what do you say to those who say that they are concerned about that, Steve?
I return to my previous point. They're concerned that Donald Trump is working with large technology platforms to restore the First Amendment. Could there be a more important thing other than national security and public safety for a president to do than to restore the full meaning, intent, and purpose of the First Amendment to the Constitution? The First Amendment in the Bill of Rights? This is foundational to democracy. President Trump is restoring democracy. He's restoring your right at home to say what you think, what you feel, what you believe, to protest policies you dislike, to support policies that you do like, and to not face deplatforming, debanking, or even worse, direct government persecution. This administration threw an individual in prison for posting a meme online about Hillary Clinton. Doug Mackey, it's a real event that happened.
Yeah.
A memer has been federally incarcerated. That's not just a slippery slope. You're at the bottom of the slope. That's full-on authoritarianism. President Trump is also working with these same platforms to obtain a competitive edge against every foreign country in our technological dominance, to my point about national security.
I want to talk to you about TikTok, because it's something that at one point, back in July of 2020, President-elect Trump said that he would consider banning. And then it seems like he had a big change of heart on it. Now we see that the CEO of TikTok will be attending on the dais, according to reports, at the inauguration. Why is the president not concerned about China's involvement in this algorithm and the amount of data harvesting that they have access to through TikTok, Stephen?
Well, I mean, first of all, I've got unfortunate news, which is that China has access to our information across multiple vectors, multiple platforms, multiple financial systems.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have a
so that's the argument that because they already have all your data, you don't have to.
No, quite the opposite.
Okay.
You need a whole of government approach, Martha, analyzing every way in which our data is compromised to develop a comprehensive national strategy to protect Americans' data and protect Americans' privacy without unconstitutionally constraining their ability to conduct free speech online. It is a fact that there are tens of millions of people who engage in the exercise of their First Amendment rights on the TikTok platform. That is a major constitutional issue. A competent executive not only has the need, but the absolute obligation to perform a balancing test to evaluate these complicated questions. And so President Trump is saying that when he comes into office, he needs to have his whole national security team, as well as his legal team, the Department of Justice, develop a strategy to ensure that our data is safe, our privacy is secure across all threats, and not just China, but all foreign countries. But at the same time, we do not give the government awesome, unrestricted, untested, and uncabined powers to severely curtail the ability of Americans to engage with free speech online. Anyone telling you these are easy or simple questions is not being honest or truthful.
No doubt. People have a lot of concern also about the addiction factor in TikTok and the fact that China doesn't allow kids in China to be on TikTok. And, we can get into that side of it another time. I want to quickly play this soundbite from Pam Bondi, because it also goes to another huge part of the policy that you'll be working very hard on with regard to our southern border. Watch this.
He has also said illegal immigration is poisoning the blood of our nation. He said that in December 2023. Do you agree with that statement?
Senator, I am not familiar with that statement, but what I can tell you is I went to the border a few months ago. I went to Yuma, Arizona, and what I saw at that border was horrific, Senator. It was horrific.
So, Stephen, I know you met with House Republicans yesterday behind closed doors about the need to scale up immigration and customs enforcement workforce, and also to, as part of this execution of mass deportation. Can you give our viewers a sense of what that's going to look like on day one?
Yes. Well, let me also just make the point that talk about poisoning the blood of our country. Fentanyl is literally poisoning the blood of hundreds of thousands of Americans and leading them to their graves, to their deaths. This is, by any definition, an attack on the United States of America by foreign alien enemies. That is a fact. It is not debatable. As to what President Trump is going to do, first and foremost, he is going to reestablish the principle that the national defense of the United States is contingent upon the maintenance and defense of the national sovereignty of the United States. You cannot be a safe or secure country until the border is protected and defended. That means the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the Department of Treasury, the Department of Homeland Security, and all of the relevant law enforcement components therein will be given the assignment and the mission to interdict all contraband, to use all financial resources to strangle the cartels, and to end all illegal immigration into this country as a top national security mission. That is the president's duty, and he will fulfill it.
Absolutely.
And he'll fulfill it with force.
We're going to speak to Dan Crenshaw a little bit later in the hour about that, so I'm glad you brought that up. But I just want to circle back before I let you go. Just a quick question. If the Supreme Court upholds the ban on TikTok, do you believe that President Trump will put forward an executive order to protect TikTok's ability to function in this country for 90 days or something along those lines?
I think President Trump's view is that the Biden administration should have and needed to allow the predecessor who's taking office to manage this process. And without giving anything away, it would be my assumption that President Trump would want to have, as President of the United States, the ability to manage this process to ensure, again, we are protecting America, but also protecting sacred and fundamental rights at the same time. And no one is more capable, more equipped, or more committed to getting that done than the soon-to-be 47th President of the United States.
Why can't we just have an American company that does the same thing? Why is it so unique, this technology that allows people to talk to each other on TikTok and spread, dance videos and election promotion?
Well, hopefully the result of investing in American technology and investing in American platforms will make that happen, as you say. But we can't ignore the fact that there's massive constitutional implications to erasing the ability of tens of millions of Americans overnight to use a platform that they have been using. And it's also naive and unserious to act, as some do, not you, but as some do, that somehow this is the only vector of Chinese competition and infiltration into Americans' data. We need a whole of government approach and strategy to achieve our security.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen Miller, thank you very much. Great to see you. Good luck in your new position.
Great
and we look forward to talking to you a lot when you take on your new role. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.